A man walks into a luxury car dealership, casually dressed, scanning the showroom with quiet curiosity. But the manager barely gives him a second glance before dismissing him as just another time waster. With a condescending sneer, he tells the man to leave, making it clear that this place is for serious buyers only. What he doesn't realize, the man he just kicked out is none other than Sylvester Stallone, the dealership's new owner. The moment of truth is coming, and it will leave the arrogant manager utterly speechless. Stay tuned as this shocking story unfolds, revealing a lesson in humility, respect, and why you should never judge a book by its cover. Watch till the end to see how Stallone responds. Before we get into today's story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Now, let's get started. The dealership gleamed under the fluorescent lights, each luxury vehicle polished to a mirror shine. The scent of leather and fresh wax filled the air, mingling with the faint aroma of espresso from the showroom's complimentary coffee bar. Salesmen, dressed in crisp suits, prowled the floor, their eyes trained on potential high-rolling customers. Sylvester Stallone, wearing a simple black hoodie and faded jeans, stepped inside, his boots making a muted thud against the pristine tile floor. His fingers, absent-mindedly, brushed against the smooth leather of a sleek, black sports car. A part of him still found it surreal. How far he had come. Once he had struggled to afford rent. Now he owned businesses, properties, even this dealership. But some things never changed. He noticed the subtle glances from the staff. They barely acknowledged him, except for the manager. A man in his mid-40s, with slicked-back hair and a practiced, insincere smile. The way he looked at Stallone, the faint air of dismissal, was all too familiar. It was the same look he had received when he was just a struggling actor. The same condescending glance that said, "You don't belong here." Stallone sighed, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't here to be recognized, nor did he expect special treatment, but something about the way the manager straightened his suit, squaring his shoulders as if preparing to remove an inconvenience, sent a flicker of irritation through him. How many times had he been judged like this? He could hear the hum of muted conversations, the clinking of a coffee cup being set down, the low purr of an engine being revved in the backlot. Yet amid all the noise, there was a quiet, biting awareness in the air, the unspoken assumption that he was out of place. He let his fingers linger on the car's hood for a moment longer, tracing the emblem with a faint smirk. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on him. This dealership, this building, and everything in it, soon it would belong to him. But for now, he would let them assume. Let them make their mistake. The moment Stallone took a step toward the showroom's main desk, the dealership manager's voice cut through the polished air like a knife. "Excuse me, sir," the manager said, his tone laced with irritation, as if Stallone had disrupted the flow of an exclusive club. "Can I help you with something?" Stallone turned slightly, taking in the man's assessing gaze, eyes flicking to his worn jeans, his hoodie, the unassuming way he carried himself. The judgment was immediate. The manager didn't see a legend, a self-made millionaire, an icon. He saw a man who didn't fit the clientele. "Just looking," Stallone replied, his voice calm, almost amused. The manager forced a tight-lipped smile. "Well, this isn't a browsing lot. We cater to serious buyers." Stallone raised an eyebrow. "That's so?" "Yes," the manager continued, folding his arms. "And I don't want to waste your time or ours if you're just here to take a few pictures for Instagram." His smirk was condescending, a clear assumption that Stallone was some nobody trying to get close to high-end cars for attention. A slow chuckle rumbled from Stallone's chest. The absurdity of the situation wasn't lost on him. Decades in Hollywood, box office hits, worldwide fame, and yet here he was, being dismissed like some street kid with no business being here. "You think I'm wasting your time?" Stallone asked, tilting his head. The manager's expression hardened. "I think these vehicles are a bit out of reach for most people." Stallone let out a breath, shaking his head. He'd seen this type before. The ones who measured worth by the price tag on a suit, the brand of a watch, the gleam of a custom car. It wasn't just arrogance, it was ignorance. "Let me ask you something," Stallone said, stepping closer. "You always judge people this fast? Or am I just lucky today?" The manager's eyes narrowed, clearly irritated that this nobody wasn't backing down. "Sir, I'm just trying to run a business here. If you're not planning to buy, I'll have to ask you to leave." That hit differently. A flicker of something sharp flashed through Stallone's chest. An old memory of doors being slammed in his face, of people laughing at the idea of a broke unknown actor making it big. He had proved them all wrong. And now, here he was, reliving the same dismissive treatment. For a moment, the weight of the past pressed down on him. But then, just as quickly, it shifted into something else. A slow smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. The manager had no idea who he had just insulted, and soon enough, he was going to find out. Stallone remained still, absorbing the moment. The dealership manager's dismissive tone, the sneer curling his lips, it was all too familiar. This wasn't the first time he had been underestimated. He had walked into casting calls only to be laughed out of the room. He had been told he wasn't good-looking enough, wasn't talented enough, wasn't marketable enough. He had sold his own dog to survive at his lowest point. And yet, despite all of that, he had become Sylvester Stallone. The frustration threatened to rise, but he forced it down, replacing it with something cooler, something more controlled. He wasn't just here as another man looking for a car. He was here as the dealership's new owner, but he wasn't going to reveal that just yet. The manager shifted impatiently, taking Stallone's silence as hesitation. "Listen, sir," he sighed, "these cars are for serious buyers. If you're not here to make a purchase, I really need to ask you to—" A voice interrupted. "Excuse me?" Both men turned. A younger salesman stood nearby, clearly having overheard the exchange. His posture was hesitant, but there was something in his expression, recognition. He glanced at Stallone, then back at the manager, his face pale. "Sir, do you know who this is?" the younger man asked. The manager let out a dry chuckle, shaking his head. "Oh, let me guess. Some kind of social media influencer?" The salesman swallowed hard. "No. This is Sylvester Stallone." Silence. The manager blinked, glancing at Stallone again, his eyes flickering with momentary doubt, before he shook his head. "Right, and I'm Tom Cruise?" He scoffed, clearly not believing it. "Look, kid, just because someone has a leather jacket and a smirk doesn't mean they're a Hollywood star." Stallone chuckled. "That's so?" The younger salesman, now visibly nervous, turned back to Stallone. "Sir, I just want to say I'm a huge fan. I watched Rocky with my dad growing up. Your story really inspired me." There it was, the recognition. The manager's smirk faltered. Stallone could see the gears turning in his head now, the uncertainty creeping in. Before he could say anything, another complication arose, one that made the moment even more tense. A security guard had noticed the interaction from afar, and seeing the manager's aggressive stance, assumed Stallone was causing trouble. "Everything all right here?" the guard asked, stepping forward, his hand resting on his belt, as if preparing to escort Stallone out. The power dynamic shifted. Now it wasn't just about one man's arrogance, it was about how people judged others based on appearances. Stallone raised his hands slightly, playing into the moment. "Hey, I was just looking around. Didn't mean to cause a scene." The manager, feeling emboldened by the guard's presence, straightened his shoulders. "Yeah, that's what I was explaining. We have a certain clientele here and he owns this dealership." Another voice cut in. Heads snapped toward the entrance. A sharply dressed man stepped forward, holding a briefcase. It was the regional director, the man who had finalized the deal with Stallone just days ago. The color drained from the manager's face. "Excuse me?" the manager stammered. The regional director strode past him, shaking Stallone's hand with a firm grip. "Mr. Stallone, it's good to see you. We've been finalizing everything, and as of today, the paperwork is complete. Welcome to your dealership." Dead silence. The manager's mouth opened, then closed, his arrogance crumbling like a house of cards. Stallone, watching the realization dawn on the man's face, finally allowed himself a small smirk. "Now," he said, turning toward the security guard, "I think we should talk about how we treat people who walk through those doors." The room felt smaller, the air heavier. The dealership manager stood frozen, his earlier arrogance now replaced by a stunned silence. His face, once twisted in condescension, had gone pale, his lips slightly parted, as if grasping for words that refused to come. Sylvester Stallone, the man he had just dismissed as unworthy of even standing in the showroom, was now staring back at him, not with anger, not with smugness, but with something far more unsettling. Disappointment. The regional director's voice sliced through the thick silence. "I assume there's been a misunderstanding?" Stallone took a slow step forward, the soles of his boots echoing against the polished tile floor. He let the moment linger, watching as realization fully dawned on the manager. The man had built his world on assumptions, on judgments about who belonged and who didn't. And now, that world was crumbling beneath him. The security guard, sensing the shift, awkwardly took a step back, removing his hand from his belt. The younger salesman, still clutching the file he had been holding, looked between the two men, his face filled with second-hand embarrassment. Stallone finally spoke. "You know," he said, his voice low but steady, "I've been told no my whole life, told I wasn't good enough, told I didn't belong." He let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. "But I've learned something about people who say things like that. They usually don't have a clue who they're talking to." The words landed like a weight on the manager's shoulders. His posture, once stiff with authority, now sagged under the weight of his own mistake. Stallone turned to the regional director. "I'd like to make a few changes around here, starting with how customers are treated when they walk in." The director nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Stallone. We'll make immediate adjustments." Stallone let his gaze drift back to the manager, offering him one last chance to salvage what little dignity he had left. The manager swallowed hard. I didn't realize—" "Yeah," Stallone cut him off, nodding. "That's the problem." And with that, the moment shifted entirely. For the first time, the dealership manager, who had built his career on authority and judgment, stood in front of someone he had underestimated, someone he had dismissed. and he realized in that single moment that he had been wrong in the worst possible way. The weight of the moment hung in the air long after Stallone's words settled. The dealership manager, a man who had once thrived on authority and snap judgments, now found himself stripped of both. His mind raced, replaying the last 10 minutes over and over, each second punctuated by his own arrogance. He had dismissed a legend, humiliated him in front of others, and now he had to face the consequences. The regional director, sensing the tension, took a step forward. "Mr. Stallone, if there's anything we can do to correct this..." His voice was careful, measured. He knew this moment could define the dealership's future. Stallone exhaled slowly, his sharp eyes still fixed on the manager. "What's your name?" The manager hesitated. His throat felt dry. Daniel. Daniel Cooper." Stallone nodded, crossing his arms. "Well, Daniel, I'm guessing you don't usually get challenged like this, huh?" Daniel shook his head, his shoulders slumping slightly. "No, sir." His voice was quieter now, stripped of the confidence that had once dripped from it. I didn't know who you were." Stallone let out a short, humorless chuckle. "And that's exactly the problem." He gestured toward the dealership floor. "You think respect should only be given based on appearances? Who walks in wearing what? Who looks like they belong? Let me tell you something. Some of the most powerful, hard-working people I know don't fit your mold." Daniel swallowed hard. The weight of Stallone's words pressed down on him, not in anger, but in something far worse: shame. A few feet away, the young salesman who had been holding the file finally spoke up. His voice was hesitant, but firm. "Mr. Stallone, I just wanted to say, I've been a fan of your movies for years, and not just because they're entertaining, but because they mean something. Rocky? That wasn't just a boxing movie. It was about fighting for your place when no one believes in you." He looked over at Daniel before turning back to Stallone. "And you just proved that wasn't just a script. It's real." Stallone's expression softened slightly. He gave the young salesman a nod of appreciation before turning back to Daniel. "That kid, he gets it. But do you?" Daniel let out a shaky breath. "I do now," he admitted. The words weren't easy, but they were necessary. Stallone studied him for a long moment before finally speaking. "Then prove it." Daniel blinked. "How?" Stallone turned toward the showroom, where a couple stood hesitantly by a luxury vehicle, looking unsure about whether they should even be there. "Go over there. Treat them the way you should have treated me." Daniel hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, he stepped forward. His usual confidence was gone, replaced by something unfamiliar, but necessary: humility. As he approached the couple, Stallone turned to the regional director. "I'll be keeping an eye on this place. If I see that kind of treatment again, I'll make more changes than just ownership." The director nodded quickly. "Understood, sir." With that, Stallone took one last look at Daniel, who was now engaged in conversation with the hesitant couple. His voice was different, warmer, more genuine. It was a start. Stallone turned, heading for the exit. The lesson had been taught. What came next was up to them. Daniel stood near the showroom entrance, watching as Sylvester Stallone walked out. His chest felt heavy, not with regret, but with the weight of change. He had spent years running the dealership with confidence, believing his quick judgments were a sign of leadership. But in mere minutes, that belief had been shattered. He looked over at the couple he had just helped. They were smiling now, asking questions about the car they had hesitated to approach before. For the first time in years, Daniel felt something unfamiliar, a sense of responsibility beyond just making sales. The young salesman approached him cautiously. "That was different," he said. Daniel exhaled, nodding. "Yeah, it was." The younger man hesitated before asking, "Are you really going to change?" Daniel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the showroom, the people walking in, the ones he used to size up. Within seconds, he saw them differently now, not as buyers or non-buyers, not as people who belonged or didn't, but as individuals with stories he didn't know. Finally, he nodded. "Yeah, I am." The words felt real, heavier than any policy or training manual he had ever enforced. As he turned back toward the dealership floor, something had shifted. The authority he once held still remained, but this time it came with humility. This story isn't just about a car dealership or a famous actor. It's about the power of humility and second chances. How often do we judge someone based on their appearance, assuming we know their worth? Daniel learned a hard lesson that day, one that changed the way he saw people forever. Have you ever misjudged someone, only to later realize you were completely wrong? What would you have done in Daniel's shoes? Let us know in the comments below. And if this story made you think twice about how we treat others, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more eye-opening stories. Because sometimes the smallest moments teach us the biggest lessons.